There's Matt. Hey, Matt. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Okay, we're about 6 after and want to make sure we get through all this and give everyone here plenty of time to ask questions and answer those. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining our last stakeholder meeting for the 18th and Peoria Development Framework Plan. You can see here, this is our agenda for tonight. So we're going to start by going through the feedback we got from the community as a part of public meeting number 3. Then we'll walk you through, what the overview, how public meeting number 4 is going to go next week, and then open it up to the group for questions about any of those components and anything else y'all have questions or want to talk about tonight. Okay, so what I'm going to do is sort of walk through the feedback we collected based on the questions that we asked everyone. So at the top here, if you remember, if you were able to join us either virtually or at Youngman School last month for the public meeting, you'll remember the questions that we asked on those sheets of paper or virtually again online as a part of the polling software. We just wanted to break it out here. So sort of by the numbers, this is the feedback we got for what folks liked about overall for each of the 3 scenarios. So if you remember, the trailhead was the first one that was presented. It had the larger open space on the west end near the rail spur. The linear was the second one, the one in the middle of the room. The second one that was presented, it had 17th Street. And some linear park systems sort of spread throughout. And then the pocket parks was the final one, the third one that had smaller parks broken up between blocks of residential development. And so just some key things here. Overall, likes the large amount of open space was a big plus for folks for the trailhead. Linear people really gravitated towards for maximizing space. And then for the pocket parks, people also liked the overall layout, the incorporation of open space, and then some of the mobility options in terms of traffic flow and connectivity. Dislikes, again, overall low density in the trailhead. Not as much high-rise or mid-rise buildings. Linearly, the new street, some folks weren't too excited about. They also felt like it might have been a little too dense. The same way with the pocket park scenario essentially as well. Suggestions, just comments that folks had around this question were enriching community culture through the linear system, and then more homes or pedestrian connectivity for the pocket parks. Overall, based on the feedback we collected, the pocket park plan, the third one, sort of had the most feedback from the community. So that's where that one sort of shook out. And then getting into residential uses. So what do you like about the mix of housing types? And then, which did you want to see more or less of? So starting with the trailhead, folks liked the townhomes, they liked the flats, and they liked the high rise. Overall, that's sort of how they rated them. Likes the mixture to some extent. This one really didn't have townhomes, but there is a breakup within the flats here in the middle that I think folks were gravitating towards for this trailhead piece. Some additional components, ensuring there's ADA access in terms of design style. I think folks wanted some variety through this one as well, and then up in the average unit size. So then same questions for linear. Folks gravitated more towards the flats in this one and some of the townhomes. People liked the mixture of housing here versus the previous one with the 6 flats, the different types of flats, 6, 3, and 12 with some mid-rise and then the high-rise building on 16th Street. Some folks also disliked townhomes. So that's where I think if you were able to attend in person, that's where the sort of discrepancy was from the community, sort of in person at least, where folks wanted townhomes, other folks didn't and wanted higher density uses. So that sort of comparison there. And then as a part of that, the need to balance density, and then the desire for denser uses along 18th and 16th to sort of front the major thoroughfares, and then ensuring the design sort of fits within the context of the current Pilsen neighborhood and the surrounding streets. So then last is, oh, that should say pocket. Same sort of situation, townhomes sort of lowest, and then it increased when we got to flats and mid-rise. People generally liked the layout, the configuration of the buildings in this site plan a little bit more, I think. Folks also enjoyed that there were more flats, or I guess more flats in comparison on 16th Street. And then some suggestions that people had were the mid-rise on 16th and 18th, increasing that potentially or reconfiguring it a little bit to fit again with sort of the scale across the street. So next set of questions, this is where we wanted to get information from the community on bedroom mixture. We know that folks really wanted to emphasize overall the desire for more family-sized units as a part of this development. And so what we asked the community to do was to break out by percentage of the total units, what they wanted to see in terms of bedroom breakout. And so what we have here is sort of the average response across the board for the 3 different scenarios. So you'll see just in general, 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms were the majority. They're the priority across all 3 different scenarios. Folks, again, emphasizing that larger family size units, that is easier to accommodate sort of in 2 and 3 bedroom from an affordability perspective. 4 bedrooms, there's a need or a desire from the community, but not as much. And then I think some things that come with that is, the added cost for a 4-bedroom unit versus a 3 and what that discrepancy looks like. But again, just to emphasize, the 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms were the priority breakouts for the community. So then looking at open space and green space, what do you like about that in this scenario? What types of these open spaces or green spaces would you like to see? So first is the trailhead. They liked, potentially having a dog park. In this scenario, we were discussing having it just east of the rail spur or potentially west on the southern end down by 18th Street. Playgrounds, green roofs were incorporated sort of across the board, and then some cookout space, some communal space for barbecues, get-togethers, things like that. Dislikes from that same end, folks thought there was too much open space within this scenario, too large. It wasn't broken up as well or as evenly distributed throughout the site. So those were some comments we received as well. And then a question that folks had in general about the open space would be who's responsible for maintaining it and developing it. And that's something that's getting worked out through the city. Does the park district get involved? How much is the developer's responsibility? That's something that'll come out through the QAP process, once this plan is adopted. Same question, again, looking at linear system, folks, again, like the dog park idea, I think that's pretty consistent across all 3 scenarios. Some additional open space for families, and some of the dislikes were that there wasn't as much green space in this one. Suggestions around it were removing the street, the additional 17th Street potentially. Some folks from a programming perspective thought that potentially adding a theater or a performance space in one of the open space areas would be a benefit. And then again, that maintenance question sort of popped up across all 3 again. And then some concerns around this one as well. Some folks mentioned crime in the area related to the open space. That was a question that some folks had as well. And then looking at pocket parks, again, dog park popped up, again, playground popped up, again, green roof popped up. It's a pretty consistent theme across the board here, just figuring out how we incorporate that appropriately through programming in the final plan. Again, with this one, we did introduce 17th Street. Similar comments, folks weren't potentially excited about 17th Street or potentially Sangamon, since in this scenario we added that as well. Just wondering to provide more opportunity potentially for green space or pedestrian walkability, less for cars. I think that stems from the concern around traffic as well. And then some suggestions, maybe more smaller parks instead of 3 larger sort of half block size ones from the community. And then I remember one person asking specifically about the rooftop green space and who will have access to that. That again really depends on the developer and how that looks, but it would largely serve the residents, within those buildings. So then looking at roadways, mobility, circulation, what did folks like about that in this scenario? That sort of comes back to in the linear and pocket park scenarios, the introduction of 17th Street across both and Sangamon in the pocket park scenario. Again, a lot of folks were concerned about traffic and potentially parking as well. So some people, thought the introduction of the street wasn't necessary. They didn't specify which one. Typically, in some cases, folks did like 17th Street. For example, in the pocket park system, they thought it would help with parking and could help with traffic flow around, between 16th and 18th and that level of connectivity. Some suggestions across the board that you can see here. Safety and security around lighting, parking options and opportunities, and then ensuring like connections north and south to University Village, south throughout the rest of Pilsen. And then again, that safety and security around lighting. So then sort of wrapping up a bit, moving into non-residential development, what did folks like about the commercial opportunities potentially? I think everyone sort of emphasized commercial along 18th Street to maintain that commercial corridor coming in from the west and carry that over through to Halsted, really maintaining that opportunity for pedestrian access. Overall, some art space, potentially that public space within the plazas and the green space, some folks made comments on. And then in terms of suggestions or wants for specific commercial uses, a lot of people emphasized a grocery store or some type of market. Again, the concerns around parking popped up again in this question as well. And then the additional component of prioritizing commercial uses, commercial spaces, part of this development for local businesses, for Pilsen residents, to smaller tenants to provide that opportunity for a new sort of Pilsen commercial space. So before I move on into public meeting number 4 overview, did anyone have questions about input collected from public meeting number 3? Nope. Okay. So then public meeting number 4 overview, really quickly. One thing we're going to emphasize through public meeting number 4, and just so you all know, we are going to present what we just presented to you all. The input from public meeting number 3 will also fold in some of the feedback from public meeting number 2 as well around the data and the market analysis. And that's going to include basically a diagram that shows how the feedback collected up to this point has gotten us to this final scenario. And essentially, if you remember from public meeting number 3, we said we would collect all your feedback and then consolidate down to one scenario. And that's exactly what we've done. We've incorporated these different components into the final scenario to present for next week. It's been adjusted to maximize sort of the development space as well as the open space and green space opportunities and different components like that. So basically what we did was we took that feedback and made adjustments, consolidated down to one, and you will be able to see the different components that people asked for, requested, and even some of the pieces that people wanted to take out. And to be fair, we did have to balance that, the desire for townhomes versus not, the desire for higher density in certain areas versus lower density in others. And that's one of the big pieces, we'll be presenting on next week in public meeting number 4. But just as a reminder for everyone, and I'm sure everyone here knows, it's our final public meeting is next Thursday, January 26th, it'll be at Youngman Elementary again. This time, start time is at 6. It'll go from 6 to 8, so still 2 hours. And the format will be very similar to public meeting number 3 with a presentation and then a shorter open house. So the content that we'll be discussing will be similar to what we discussed in public meeting number 3, except this time we've narrowed it down to one scenario. It'll still have, the site plan, the models, you'll see the locations of buildings versus open space. You'll see the mobility connections. You'll be able to get a sense of the height of the buildings and different built form components. The number of units will be presented again as well. So it'll be sort of our final total count. That'll also include square footage for non-residential uses. The land use program will be there as well. And then a couple additional components that we're going to be emphasizing this time that we didn't have for the previous 3 scenarios will be the open space and green space programming. So where folks said, yeah, we really want a dog park, in this space, not exactly sure where it goes, but we want it here. We want a playground for children and youth in the community to be able to come play. The green roofs was a key component, access to the trails, things like that. In this presentation next week, we're going to emphasize that. We're going to have a couple diagrams that show you where we think the dog park would fit best, where some public art space would fit best, where a playground would fit best. Basically, all those configurations now have an actual home within the site. Instead of just saying, yeah, we think this is a good idea, we want to emphasize it. Now you're going to see where we think it could fit as a part of the development program. Similarly, we're going to provide a preliminary financial analysis overview. So we had to wait to get down to this one scenario to start that financial analysis component. And so now we've done that. And so next week, we're going to provide just a rough outline of what that looks like, what process we go through for conducting that financial analysis, and then emphasizing, based on community feedback and interest, we're running basically 2 scenarios from a financial side. Both are promoting or are emphasizing and ensuring that the site will be developed as majority affordable housing. One scenario will actually be looking at it as if it was 100% affordable. And then the second one will still be majority affordable, but it will have some mixed income opportunities in there. Additionally, we will be providing an outline and overview of the owner versus renter occupied opportunity within both of those scenarios, just to provide a general sense of what that breakdown could look like for this site. Again, as a reminder, that really gets decided once the city chooses a set of developers to actually construct the project through the QAP process. But what we're doing is like that baseline analysis, so the city has it when they go to choose a developer or group of developers as a part of this process. So they'll have that to look at and consider against when evaluating applications. But just to reiterate, the big components that are new for this one is the open space program, a more clearly delineated land use program, and then that preliminary financial analysis overview as well. So then the format, again, it's very similar to public meeting number 3. The big difference here is that instead of splitting up the 2-hour time that we have into half presentation and half open house, the majority of the time is going to be presentation. We wanted to do this to provide the community to ask questions in more detail during the presentation. So we'll stop and take opportunities for questions, as we move through the different components of the presentation. For example, once we go through the site plan and the model, we'll stop and see if folks have questions about the revised layout, where the green space should go, where the buildings are, that sort of configuration piece. Then move on to like open space and green space, same sort of discourse, is the dog park in the right location, that sort of stuff, to give people a chance to ask those questions about our process and what we went through to get to this sort of final scenario. And then same thing around the financial components, and then any sort of additional Q&A at the end. We're not setting a time for that because we do, again, want to emphasize the opportunity for everyone in the community to ask questions and hear them sort of all at once. So whatever remaining time we have, we'll go to the open house component. If we don't get to that, that's okay. We do essentially the questions that we would ask when we get to the open house piece will be very similar to the previous ones, just to do that final round of iteration. But again, the real priority here is for folks to ask questions and understand, what the final scenario looks like. That will sort of have one final round of revisions with the city before it goes for adoption later this year. So again, the majority of the time is presentation focused. We want you all to ask questions as you have them throughout that process. And then when we wrap that up, if we have time, we'll move into the open house just for folks to see things maybe a little bit in more detail on the boards and stuff like that. But if we aren't able to get to it, that's okay too, because we want to make sure we're able to take all the questions from everyone. And then last, that virtual component, it'll run exactly the same. What we're presenting in person will be seen by folks joining virtually via the Zoom. They'll be able to hear and ask questions. We'll be in there answering questions, in the chat as they come up, but then having, the people in person asking and answering there as well. And then same process, when we get to the open house piece, then folks in the room will go down to that. People virtually on the Zoom will have the polls, the questions up ready to go when we move into that piece. So are there any questions about the overview for public meeting number 4, the process we're going to go to, what additional components we're going to be adding? Any questions about that?
Yeah, Sean. So there's 2 questions in the chat. 3 actually. I want to address one from Felipe for the rental properties. Felipe, we don't know who the managers will be. That will depend on the proposals that we get. That will all be part of the QAP proposals that we receive after this is put out. So once we start receiving applications and proposals for the QAP funding, we'll have more information on who will develop these properties, who will be managing, like what amenities I'll be including, all of those details. Sean, I'll toss the other 2 questions to you because they're more in your sphere.
For sure, yeah. I guess just to go back up, can you send us that information prior to January 26th? Moises, can you give me a little bit more information on what you mean by that information?
Yeah, you mentioned the diagram. I mean, you mentioned there's going to be one proposal, right? Going to be presented. So is there a way that this group can obtain that prior, or is that what's the plan?
Yeah, the diagram and stuff is going to be presented first to the public. We want everyone to sort of see it at the same time. In terms of like proposal pieces, the QAP process isn't going to start until after really plan adoption. So that'll be public once the city goes through that process. So that's really nothing we have any involvement in. And then it looks like Felipe had a couple other pieces. Any analysis on the impact towards property taxes this development will have on surrounding properties? And then the second question is the property going to be owned by the city after it's developed? Property tax analysis, that's not a part of this task. In general, for affordable housing or even in mixed income housing, they will have like a slight impact on property taxes. Traditionally, it's a very low sort of rate that impact will be, but we just won't know until we're able to get into it. I know that the Pilsen community is working with the tax assessor or having discussions with the county assessor around the property tax increase. That's really all I can say that we know about that process. We're not with the assessor, so we're not involved in that, unfortunately, so can't really answer any other questions about that just because we're not involved in it and we don't know. And then is the property going to be owned by the city after it's developed? That'll come out of the development process through the QAP as well. Currently, the city owns the land. It's going to be a part of the development process. So it'll be provided for the actual construction of the site, but the city's going to have to work with the developer or developers to figure out how ownership gets worked out, once construction's completed. Any other questions from anybody? And feel free to just shout them out if you have them.
Yeah, just so even for contracting, so how do local contractors, is that even part of, so once it goes out to the QAP, the proposal process and looking for developers, it's up to the developer to hire within the community, or they could hire somebody from a contractor, a general contractor, or whatever, from like California or other states or just outside of Chicago if they wanted to?
I think, correct me here, you're asking what the hiring requirements are for construction for the project once the developer has been selected.
Right.
And yeah, that's part of the process with the city. I honestly don't know what the city's requirements are around that. I'm sure they have some sort of local component requirement, but I don't know if that's a majority or what percentage that requirement is. That's something that you'd have to ask city folks.
I can talk a little bit about that, Sean, and that's going to depend. Also, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but a lot of these are going to go back to the QAP process and how we select awardees. So normally when we receive a proposal for a developer or for a development, that will include who the developer is, normally an architecture firm that's doing the design, and a contracting firm that's doing the actual building. Those are all normally they'll submit a bid together or as a group. And as part of the QAP and the criteria that we set out, proposals will be weighed differently based on a number of things, including like the amenities that they include, the composition of the development group, where they're based. All these things are going to factor in how proposals are weighted and selected. So until we start getting proposals in, we won't have answers for a lot of these questions. That's why it's important for folks to stay connected with this process. And as we start receiving proposals later on this year, hopefully in the spring, you'll be able to review those as well before the city makes selections. Like we'll have opportunity to see what the proposals look like, who the developers are, and engage in the city in helping us make a selection on who the best developer for the different size and different phases of this will be.
Thanks, Edwin.
Thank you.
Nicole's question, how will AECOM and the city ensure community input beyond this stage and after the final public meeting? So after the final public meeting, we're going to collect that feedback, work back with the city to revise the draft scenario into a final scenario. That'll get put into a formal plan where we'll have recommendations around phasing and development and different components like that, economic strategy, and what that looks like. Once that's the plan is drafted, that'll go for adoption, and there's a public comment period where the entire community has the opportunity to review the plan, ask questions, provide comments back to the city on that. And then once it's adopted, then it's a part of the public engagement process through the QAP. And there's a 30-day comment period around that in a couple different spots. Edwin, I'll let you speak to the rest of post-plan adoption.
For sure. So yeah, like Sean mentioned, there are going to be more opportunities for engagement. This particular process for the planning and the scenario drafting is done after the end of the month, basically. But the city will be adopting all of this. I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think this is a perfect moment for it. I've already talked to a couple of you about this at the last public meeting and in conversations that we've had since then. But once we wrap up with this process next week, just be on the lookout, because we will be bringing all this community engagement work in-house at DOH. So you should be getting, everyone on this group will be getting an email from me over the next 2 to 3 weeks to find a time to connect one-on-one and set up how we want to continue this engagement process. This doesn't end here. This is very much like not even phase 1. This is a phase 0. So we will be continuing to have these conversations. The QAP will be published sometime in the next couple of weeks. So you'll be able to review those, the draft of the QAP, submit public comments. We will have a public meeting sometime in February where folks from the community will be invited to participate and provide comment on any part of the QAP or all of it. So we will share information out so folks can participate in that. And moving forward, we will continue to be in contact with everyone in this group and other members of the community as we start receiving proposals, start considering different proposals and developers. We want to include the community in all of these conversations. So I will be reaching out to everyone in this group individually to set up that time to talk and see how this process will continue to play out over the next 6 months and over the next year.
Thanks, Edwin. Felipe?
So part of the QAP, we could say one of the requirements is that they hire 20% of their labor, whatever, from the community or within the city of Chicago, so that way local, even Chicago contractors to get in. And also that is, if it's city owned, that there's a probably like a resident, and I'm just throwing these out, like we could say that there's a resident component, just like for any city department, that they have to be a Chicago resident to work in the site.
Yes, those will all be comments that you can submit as part of the QAP process. Those are all things that you can bring up at the public meeting. In fact, those are exactly the things that we want to be hearing from. Like how do we best select the proposals and the developers for not just this project, but all the developers across the city that are getting funded through the QAP.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Oh yeah, I did. I didn't. So was there like a community space where it's open to the community mentioned? I didn't hear that, but I thought that was mentioned in some of the, like a public space that's allowed for public.
In the
In any of the
project?
city- Right, in the project.
Correct. There was, I think, a couple comments around that. Currently, in any of the original scenarios, any community space was outdoor space, public open space, public green space. There isn't any structural community space currently.
Currently, so that could change. Is that going to come out before the 26th?
The 26th scenario has that community space from a public open space and green space perspective. It doesn't currently emphasize or show any structural community space right now, but if that's, questions or comments we get from folks during the public meeting next week, we'll definitely bring that back and discuss it with the city.
Okay, and so then, like you said, that this is like ground zero until further questions from the public as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like Edwin said, this plan is the very beginning of this entire process. There's still years before the site actually gets developed. So there's plenty more opportunity for the community to ask questions or emphasize some of the different land use programming or components they want to see in the site.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your guys' work.
Yeah, thanks, Felipe. Questions from anyone else?
This is Pat. I just wanted to add, I guess I wanted to remind everyone, because we mentioned from day one that it's a framework plan. And that really what it is a framework for the quantity of green space, the type of buildings, and the land use. So we've come very, very far, but yes, it's right at the beginning.
Javier?
Yeah. Okay. So so it seems like y'all are developing the framework for the past few months, and like the past few months, we've been raising like the same points about density, affordability, et cetera, et cetera. Would the QAP process be the space for that, to push for those demands?
It is another avenue for those questions to be brought up. So one thing to consider is that the comments that we receive during the QAP will inform what developments how we frame the criteria for what developers should bring to the table when they submit their proposals. So questions around density, around affordability, there'll be other opportunities for that, but questions around density, design, all those different things are part of the QAP conversation and are also part of the proposal selection conversation. So keep in mind, to Pat's point, that this is a framework, so the end result might not look exactly like the scenario we have here, but all those comments are part of these our decision-making process and the way in which we weigh and score the different proposals and how we select the different developers to develop the site itself.
Okay, so like in a sense, right, like you all make like the frame, it's up to the potential developer to paint the picture and like, just to put in layman's terms.
Yes, in reality, yes. So we have this framework. Developers will take whatever it is that is produced here and incorporate it into the QAP and submit proposals to say, hey, I want to develop this part of the site, and this is what I'm proposing to build there based on the criteria and the requirements that the QAP says need to be included in order to develop the site.
Moises, I think you had your hand up at some point. Did you have a question?
I think it was similar to Javi's about the QAP process, where other framework recommendations can be debated or whatnot, because that's other pieces I think that are important. So yeah, I think that was just a clarifying question.
For sure.
One last thing I'll add is that even the final product of this process will not be the final product of the QAP. That is why we have a separate public comment and community engagement process for the QAP itself. So whatever the result of this process is and what we bring to the draft QAP will still be able to be adjusted based on community feedback. So it's going to be really important for folks to submit those comments, be a part of the public meeting and all their engagement opportunities around the QAP, so we can continue to fine tune those details. And whatever is published in the final QAP is responsive to what the community wants and what the community needs. And Ruben, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, and maybe Sean can speak to this. Where we're landing on a phased rollout, and maybe explain how, normally how long it will take and how the bidding process, because it will be tied into state funding, and how, that might sort of play out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ruben. So as a part of the final plan that we'll be taking forward to the city for adoption, there will be a phasing plan as a part of the entire development. So all of the buildings in the open space will basically identify different phases for when they should get developed as a part of the entire development process. And that'll be based on really configuration of the site, which buildings are connected to which open space components, who's going to take ownership of those components, and what makes sense to group them together in terms of actually constructing the building and the site, as well as the financial implications, the financial options for that as well. So like Ruben mentioned, the different funding sources, when is that going to be available? How is that going to be applied across the different structures? A different component of each of those, for example, is if we're looking at rental housing, affordable rental housing, you're using a lot of low-income housing tax credits. That has a rollout grant time for the different components. The city has a limit of funding around that. So different developments are going to get different parts of that LIHTC funding. It won't all go towards this development here at 18th and Peoria all at once. So rolling that out in phases. And then when we're looking at owner-occupied options for affordable housing, that's an entirely different set of funding sources that has its own different requirements, its own different structures, and even its own different level of grantees. Not all of it will go to the city. Some will be direct to developers. Some could potentially be direct to property owners. So there's different phases in there, and that's what we're getting into as part of the financial analysis as well. So that phasing recommendation will also include those financial implications into how that phasing would be best suited to sort of start and end. And then I know Nicole had another question in the chat about who exactly is drafting the QAP, and I'll let Edwin speak to that one.
Yeah, so the short answer to that is the entire Department of Housing. Every single bureau in DOH has a hand in some part of the QAP, and keep in mind that while in the sense of this group and this project, this is a part of the QAP, but it's not the entire QAP. The entire QAP is a citywide plan that covers 2 years of development plans and financing for projects across the city, multifamily, single family, like everything in terms of housing development. So this is just one component of a much larger, much more in-depth plan. It's also a very technical document that is not very community friendly. It is very much geared towards developers and contractors. So it's very jargony, it's very technical. It's personally, I'm not even super well versed on all the different funding things that go in it and how everything is laid out. Slowly working my way to learn more, but it is a very involved process that we've been working on for months now. And this is kind of the culmination of one piece of it and of the process for the next 2 years, which will be published in the next couple of weeks.
And then just to add to that, this 18th in Peoria is not the only project that's getting submitted into the QAP. There are others throughout the city that are also getting included. So it's not just this project that developers will be submitting applications on. There's others throughout this process for this 2-year round of the QAP. Oh, and Nicole had another question. Could there be a community representative who is involved in that process?
So we already have community input, and that's why the public comment period and public meeting are going to be so important, because that is really the time that we have to include all the details and fine tune what the end product will be. Because once the QAP is finalized in the spring of this year, hopefully, we're shooting for sometime in mid-March. That is our funding criteria and our financing plan for the next 2 years, and we won't have another revision to the QAP until 2025. So in the summer, early fall of 2024, we'll start working on the revisions for 2025 when the new plan will come out. Chicago revises and updates its QAP every 2 years. And Ruben, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah, Edwin, can you remind me again, does the QAP go through Plan Commission or Department of Housing? Sorry, Committee on Housing, or how does that get vetted?
I will have to double check on that because I haven't been very involved in the QAP drafting process, so I don't have an answer, but it does have to be approved by the commissioner and by other folks before it is finalized and published for the public and for developers to review.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. So we do have another 10 minutes that I'm happy to give back to everyone, but want to make sure you've got time to ask any other questions you might have about this process, through final adoption, or like we have been, the QAP and what steps look like after that. Is there anything else from anybody?
Javier, I see you have your hand
Javier?
up. Do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, I pressed it by accident. No, you guys pretty much answered what I needed to hear.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, we can give you that 10 minutes back. Thank you everyone for joining sort of this final meeting. We really appreciate you taking the time to provide your input and help us move forward through this process. Like Edwin said, he's going to be reaching out, for the QAP and the community engagement components around that. So please, continue to work with him and get involved in that process. And then join us next Thursday night. If you can make it to Youngman, that's awesome. We'd love to see you. If you can't, and we'll be at home or somewhere where you have access to Zoom, please join us that way. Please share it out. Everyone here should have that on their calendar. If you don't, please let us know and we'll forward the invites. You can forward it along to, everyone else in your communities and your organizations. We want to have as many people there as possible next week. So.
Yes, we look forward to seeing everyone. Encourage your friends to come too. The more, the merrier.
Sorry, one more. Yeah, if folks, the stakeholder side, if you guys would like, we still have a few more flyers at the ward office. If you guys are going to be out and about over the weekend, please stop by and pick up a few. We have the flyers with the QR code and the info. We have a few left in the office, so just please come on down. 2100 West Cermak Road. Thank you.
Javier, I see your question. I think it is on social media, but I'll be sure to have the DOH comms person post it as well. And I can send out an email as well tomorrow morning to everyone, so you have it. I just want to say thank you to all of you for being a part of this process, for being so engaged, for coming to the meetings, for helping with outreach and all the work that you've done around this. And just be on the lookout for an email from me, so we can keep working on this moving forward.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good
Thanks,
rest of your night.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Thank you.